Today, I am so grateful to be joined by two of the most lovely women that I have known, women that have been in my life for a long time, LaDeane Cobabe and Erin Boston. LaDeane Cobabe is one of my first mothers in law. When my late husband was widowed and he and I met, LaDeane was one of the first people that welcomed me and loved me into their family. LaDeane's the mother of Alicia, who was my late husband's first wife, who passed away many years ago. And Erin is Alicia's little sister. And again, one of my sweetest friends, and two women who just welcomed me into their hearts and family and lives at a time when they had been heartbroken with the loss of their daughter and sister. So thank you for coming and sharing with me your experiences with grief, which have been extensive. LaDeane has lost three daughters and a husband, and Erin has lost three sisters, a father, and her father-in-law is currently um, suffering with cancer. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So would you two take a minute and introduce yourself? Erin, let's start with you.
Well, I am almost 50, mother of 6 children. I have 4 grandchildren. I am a lover of the theater, all things theater. I just finished a show, and my employment is teaching and directing children's theater, which is a blast. I could not think of anything that would make me happier to do than that. Um, Musical theater is my favorite. So as a singer, I want to sing and dance and do it all. But man, it's hard work.
I bet. You sang at our wedding.
Yeah. Yeah. Having just come off a show, it is exhausting in my body. I'm like, wow, man, I am not a young kid anymore. But I am grateful for my talents and abilities and the opportunities that I have to use them and share joy with other people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you are crazy creative. Your whole family is amazing singers. They all can cook. Oh my gosh, just talented, beautiful family. LaDeane, would you take a minute, introduce yourself, give a little life sketch?
Well, I was born at home 98 or 89 years ago, 89 and a half years ago. So I've been around the block a time or two. I grew up I was number 3 in a family of 6. I fought a lot with my older brother, but he's turned out to be my best friend. Um, I married at 21 and gave birth to 6 children, which was a joy. Uh, it's very difficult to even talk about normal, easy things. It's going to be hard when we get into the hard stuff here today. But I had a happy childhood, a hardworking childhood. But I grew up with the idea that motherhood was a very important role. And I'd been married a month when I got pregnant. And giving birth to the 6 children was a joy. And it brings me happiness even today. And I feel very strongly about the role of motherhood. And sometimes it gets me in a little trouble, but that's still something that's a very important part of me, is nurturing my children.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
With my children that have passed away, it it's hard to get into that because each one was so different, and my worries and concerns about each one was different. Uh, I've had to come to terms with that. each child and each experience has been different.
I can really appreciate that. Would you actually take a minute and just tell us about each of your kids? 3 are living, 3 have passed. Would you start at the oldest and just give us a little sketch about their personality?
Doug is the oldest, our first child. He's a very kind, tender person, and he's had his own struggles in life, as we all do. He graduated from BYU and has attempted many things, but he's been successful in being a dad. Dia is the second child, and she's the one that I worried about all the time from the beginning. Beautiful little girl, and grew up to sing and have a good time with her girlfriends. And they sang together in a group that was invited to sing often. Rhonda is next. And when I think about Rhonda, I smile. Rhonda had her own problems, as every child does, but she was a joy. And Jeff is next. Very talented, has ended up being a carpenter and has been in charge of making furniture for the temples around the world. And many of his works have been sent overseas. He even spent 6 months in Nigeria so that they could build the furniture for and parts of the temple. So, and he has a family of 7, 2 adopted, 5 of their own birth children and 2 adopted children. Then next is Alicia. And Alicia had 2 children, which she knew she would be suffering because of her contracting rheumatoid arthritis after her first baby was born. But she went ahead and got pregnant a second time, knowing that she'd have to be without the pain medication all the time she was pregnant. And then the final child is Erin, who was, Alicia was 10 and a half years old when Erin was born. So we had a nice gap in between. And Erin has been a joy from the beginning. And I always had dreams and hopes of her achieving the musical talent that she has. She just fell into the right method of learning voice and is now able to teach other people, starting with the youth. She has several students, and hopefully they can carry on this tradition that Erin is teaching them.
Yeah, Erin, I know you had a range of about 4 octaves at one point. Is that still the case?
True.
Well, it's probably bigger than that. It's just,
oh my goodness,
I don't use all of it when I sing a song necessarily, but when I'm vocalizing and warming up and working on my instrument, on my voice, yeah, we work from the bottom of the piano to as high as it'll take it. So,
well, yeah, that's amazing. Your kids are all amazing, talented, lovely. Now, how about Dad? Talk a little bit about him. He was a character.
Yes, he was a character.
So Dad didn't have a brain mouth filter.
That is true. That's why he's not in this interview. No, I'm just kidding.
He would think, he'd think something would come into his head and it would just come out of his mouth. And I will say that I have inherited that. I did not realize it until I was an adult, but I have inherited that sometimes I speak without thinking. So I try to be careful. But yeah, he would say things without thinking about the consequences sometimes. And
Yeah.
um,
Well, Dad decided was a plumber and worked with his family in the family business, and was to uh, when he married me, he was given a partnership in the plumbing business. But after working for a while, he decided to go to school since he had the GI Bill, the education bill. So he decided to go to school and go to dental school. So that was 6, 7 years of schooling that he went through in our young married life.
With children.
yeah,
After graduation, we moved to Northern California. He practiced a few years, 10 years, and then we moved back to Southern California, and he worked more in finance with real estate. So
Yeah,
the jack of all trades, and
that's true.
he said master of none, but he was tremendous. He was
Oh,
very
yeah.
successful financially.
and I will
Yeah.
say something that even though he would say things that you would kind of make you cringe once in a while, it was never with ill intent.
Or
It was,
hurtful.
Right.
like if he said something, and he was always, if he did say something or make a mistake, he was always very quick to apologize. You know, he's like, oh,
Well,
you know,
and the loving things came blurted out too.
yeah,
I mean, he didn't hold back on how much he loved his family
yeah,
and how much he loved the gospel of Jesus Christ
yeah,
True.
and believed in it.
yep.
So now, Erin, tell us about your father-in-law.
Um, my father-in-law is a great man. He, he is hardworking and kind. He has been an amazing grandpa to my kids. He's a good man. He's a righteous man, and he about I would well, we saw him. The girls and I took a trip to California, just a girls' trip. So with my daughters and my daughter-in-law, and we went and saw him and had dinner with him and visited with him for a couple days, and it was just a few weeks after that. So that was in September. A few weeks after that was when he um, wasn't feeling well. Thought he had a UTI. Went to the clinic and they told him that it was not a UTI. It was stage 4 prostate cancer,
Oh
and it
my
had
gosh.
metastasized in the bones in his hip and pelvis, and I believe in his spine. Um,
He must
and
have been in tremendous pain.
since then, it has gone like gangbusters, and it's pretty much in every bone in his body now. Um, he has done chemo and radiation, and I don't know what else, but I think they're starting on a fourth treatment for him in the upcoming days, which is a scary one because it's like nuclear. You know,
Right.
I don't even know how it works, but um, he
So at this point, do you have hope for remission, or is it just trying to have more time or more quality of life?
I think, well, mom asked my husband about it, Dave. She asked him about how if he had hope about it the other day, and he said that his hope is that he dies quickly
Really?
because he's in a lot of pain. He can't.
Right.
He went from riding his bike and walking a couple miles every day, a month ago, to being in a wheelchair 80% of the time. Every once in a while, he'll use the walker. Um, and just being in pain. He can't eat. He doesn't want to eat. And he's weak. He's tired. He can visit with people for about 15 minutes and then he needs another nap. And you know, his quality of life has deteriorated significantly. And we don't want to watch him suffer.
Right. And we're at the about the end of May now, and you're talking about from September. So this is a huge change happening in a short amount of time.
Yes.
So thank you both for those sharing about these people that you love so much. And this brings us to something that I haven't talked to anyone about yet, at least I mean on the podcast, and that is that almost always I've been speaking to people who are having memories of someone, and talking about their experiences surrounding these really hard times, but they're detached from it because the person has already passed. But let's talk a little bit about what what sustains you as you are experiencing watching someone, you know, where you can see that their time is limited. How do you go through that in a way that doesn't destroy you? Or do you just go into fight or flight mode and we are going to survive this moment? Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Well, I think the fact that we don't have a choice, makes us have to either, you know, not necessarily fight or flight, but what are you going to do? How are you going to move forward from here? And I think that uh, I personally receive a lot of comfort in the fact that I know that when he's gone from here, he's not gone forever. He's going someplace else. He will have work to do. He will be with people who know him and love him, and he will be busy. He won't be just gone. He doesn't disappear into nothing. Um,
Right,
and because of the blessings of the temple, we will be able to see him again.
right,
And so I do receive a lot of comfort in that. Um, it's just hard now because we will miss him here and now. You know.
right. And what do you find? What does he need? What does your family need? What are the things that a family experiencing this need?
Um, I don't know. I think you know. So one thing that someone did for him, was, so my voice teacher is of a different faith, and at her church they have a um, I can't remember what it's called, but they have ladies that they do prayer quilts, and
Mhm.
the ladies get together and they make a quilt for a specific purpose, and they pray over the quilt, and they pray over the person while they are making the quilt, and then they finish the quilt and they take it to the congregation, and the whole congregation prays for that person, and then they take that quilt and they give it to the person. And
That
so,
is beautiful. Like
so
the prayers are woven into the fibers.
yeah, yep. And so, that was something that she offered and said, "Hey, would you like us to make a prayer quilt for Bruce?" And I gratefully accepted. And he has this beautiful quilt that he can throw over his lap, and and it contains all of those prayers. And you know,
I love
so
that.
that was something that I felt was very comforting and kind. I think just
Yeah.
kindness is what we need. Consideration, you know, a little bit of grace, from other people, because you're off your game. You're not getting everything done the way you want to because your mind is in this concerned state for the well-being of someone you love. And so
Yeah.
I think a little bit of kindness, a little bit of grace, um, is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Mom, did you want to add to that?
Well, I'm thinking about the prayer quilt and how important vicarious work is. And we know all about that when we go to the temple. And uh, and it's just as easy to believe that those prayers are all intended for Bruce or whomever, and that it's a blessing in the lives of the family who are affected by it.
Absolutely. One of the most profound doctrines of our belief system is this idea of vicarious work, which of course was the work of Christ in our behalf, right? This vicarious atonement for sin in our behalf shows
Exactly.
us that vicarious works on behalf of someone who cannot do it for themselves is a principle of heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Anytime we do anything for anyone, as President Nelson says, on either side of the veil. Well, what what difference does it make in your grief process how someone passes? I know you mentioned that in 3 of the cases there had been illness. It had been, well, at least with Alicia and Dad, there was, you know, a diagnosable illness, right? Uh, the case with Dia, I think, was a little different, and then with Rhonda, it was an illness that was undiagnosed, so it was.
Well, let me back up to Dia. Uh, it was a problem built on lack of knowledge and information for her, for the doctors who treated her, and she complained of pain, and they treated her with drugs to cover the pain, and which led eventually to addiction. And so, because of my lack of information, even that I've learned since then, uh, that it was not all her fault.
Right.
That she became addicted. It wasn't just someone experimenting with drugs and becoming addicted. It was entirely different. And even understanding what her health problem was, it's taken me a while to learn and understand that. And so I feel a lot differently about it now than I did at the time.
So how do you go forward with these kind of heavy experiences on your heart? You know, how does faith play into that? How does your family relationship play into that? How does a person overcome feeling like, wow, I wish I had known what she needed or what he needed, but at this point there has to be healing from that, because you can't go back and change the past, right?
No, you can't change what was, but it can either be a tool to help you understand better, or you can forget it. And for me, it was a quest for more knowledge about healthcare, about disease, uh, and about treatment or not treatment. Um, so I've always loved to read since I was a little kid. That was my quest when I went to school the first day, was to, this is good. Now I can learn to read. So, but I read a lot, and I continue to read a lot. And fortunately, I've gained some sympathy and understanding for her situation, the
Right.
situation with her.
Right. And that's a key point, I think, what you just said, to gain sympathy and understanding. That's a really important piece. That's something I think that can be applied in a lot of situations, because you can't always, someone like Alicia developed rheumatoid arthritis and then she had leukemia. There's not this component where you say, oh, if only this or that had happened, or they had, but this idea of having sympathy for just the journey that a person takes in their own life to try to live can alleviate a lot of the grief that you feel after they're gone, I think. What do you think, Erin?
Well, I keep thinking, my brain keeps going back to the atonement of Jesus Christ, and that, we have to forgive whatever, like with Thea, because she was an addict, because she overdosed, we have to forgive. Like there's part of that process where we have to lean on him so we can forgive her for, why did you do this to yourself? Because that was the first thought when mom called me to tell me about Dia. I was like, oh, Dia, what did you do?
Wow.
Well,
And so,
something I've learned about that exactly was that it was not intentional overdose. It's something that occurs with an addict when they're addicted to drugs. They can take the drug and, oh, they feel so good, but they forget, oh, did I take it? I need some more. They take
Yeah.
more, and then it causes the overdose and causes death just because they accidentally took more, and they didn't do it intentionally to leave this world. But
Right.
it's not an unusual occurrence with an addict. Then, when it's available again, prescribed by a physician,
Yeah.
then it's easy to overdose accidentally.
Right. And one of the problems with there's very few cause of death um, phrases that are put on a death certificate. And one of the problems with the cause of death, suicide, is that unless you are witnessing somebody do it and they are literally telling you this is what I intend to do, it's impossible
Yeah,
to prove that someone intended to die through means at their own
exactly.
hands.
Exactly. You're right on that.
yeah.
Erin was starting to say something and I interrupted.
Oh, I was just talking about, when I was talking about the atonement, how important it is for us to be able to forgive them for leaving, or
Right,
whatever it is. It's
right,
also that, the atonement works for us just as well as it does for them. And we can be, we can, sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for not doing more, or not helping more, or not knowing the right thing to do at the time. Um,
right.
so it takes place in ourselves as well. We have to work on that for ourselves as well, I think sometimes.
So how have you? What are some of the practical ways that you apply these principles in order to forgive or to feel peace?
A long time ago, Leroy and I were primary teachers in Sunday school. And there was a little boy who he always had answers. You ask a question, he'd say, keep the commandments. Didn't matter what the question was, this little boy would raise his hand and say, keep the commandments. And what wisdom comes from the child, because that's the truth. That's the bottom line, is if you can keep the commandments, things are going to work out. Things are going to be okay.
Well, and there's so much comfort that
Yeah,
comes from prayer as well.
Exactly.
You can ask for the things you need, and know that someone is listening. And although you may not receive a full comfort now, you may receive only partial comfort, or for a little time here and a little time there, but there is a greater plan. There is something greater at work here than just what's happening right now. And somebody knows what's going on, and you're part of that plan, and they're not going to leave you high and dry. Even though this is hard, they're not going to leave you high and dry. There's a plan, and you're a part of it. That
I
makes
agree with both of you. Yeah, I agree with both of you. There's you go through so much emotionally, spiritually, and even physically as you grieve, right? As we grieve, we experience it in all these ways, and I find that sometimes we can address the mental anguish, and counseling is really helpful for that. Prayer is really helpful for that. Um, but we even physically, when you were talking about keeping the commandments, LaDeane, I was trying to think to myself, why is that's such a powerful tool? But I think one of the reasons for me is that when I am striving to live a life of holiness, and I'm not talking about like a monk chanting in a cave holiness, just the idea that I'm striving in my daily life to live in a way that I can spiritually receive comfort, which physically happens. I think it's harder to have that kind of comfort if you're sitting in a bar with a bottle. You know what I mean? Because it numbs everything spiritually, emotionally. It physically affects you. I don't know. Maybe you have, maybe you have thoughts. I don't feel like I'm articulating.
Well, it made me think of all of these, um, the talks at conference, about keeping our covenants, you know,
Mhm.
our temple covenants, our baptismal covenants, that being on the covenant path, all of those things bring us closer to Christ, which gives us greater understanding of the here and now, and
Right.
and not just the here and now, but it helps us understand what's happening now so that we have a better understanding of where we're going, I think,
Right.
and what.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it frees us up to be of service to others.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And when our lives are intentionally lived for things of God, our eyes are opened to the suffering of others, and that brings a lot of meaning and context to to the purpose of this life.
Now, this may be jumping ahead a little bit, but the thought is very strong. I think of when I look at the photographs, and I've saved a lot of photographs, and I'm trying to sort through and throw away what I don't need and none of the family needs. I look at a picture of Rhonda as a child, and she's always has this big grin. Every picture with the small little group when she was maybe 2 years old, she has a big laugh coming out as the photographer clicks the camera. So photographs have been a wonderful way. And I look at photographs of Alicia, and I
Yeah.
was with her when she passed away, and how painful that was. Uh, the doctor came in and he said, "Well, okay," and he unplugged everything. It was very abrupt for me and for Steve, I know, but for some reason I thought he understands better than I do why that happened just like it happened. But the photographs of all of my children, including the one who's have passed away, and of my husband, that's uh, that's when the comfort comes. And
Yeah.
it's been many years since Alicia passed away, and uh, it was 2018 when Leroy passed away. But I still find joy and comfort um, seeing the photographs.
I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because that's a very good practical thing that we can focus on. And really now with digital cameras and Facebook, it, you'd almost have to be living under a rock to not have 1,000 pictures of somebody, but it still happens. I know of someone whose wife was so averse to having her photo taken that he has very few pictures of her at all. And, that was something that, this was an interesting thing. Alicia herself was the family photographer for Steve and the kids.
Yes.
And one of the kind of painful things for the kids is that they have lots and lots of pictures of them with their dad, but they didn't have very many pictures with their mom. The candid pictures, just the being on vacation pictures. And I thought that's made me a little bit more aware of trying to make sure when photos are being taken that the person who's always taking the picture, make sure that person's in the picture.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right?
Well, very interesting to add to that. I have a big envelope that I have all of the pictures of Alicia, and I have taken out several that I'm saving to pass on to Erin. But everything that you want to know about someone else or stuffed in that big envelope. And I think, well, I'll leave it for Erin. She can decide what to do with it in some future date. But, so there are a lot of pictures of her.
That's good.
A godmother saw to that.
I will say, we were talking about the pictures. It's been interesting because Luke he's my 13-year-old. He's my youngest. He knows what's going on with his grandpa, with his pops, Bruce. And he lives with his 89-year-old grandma. So he is aware of what's coming.
Right. Life cycles.
Yep. And one of the things, since his grandpa's diagnosis, he has been praying for, or that he has expressed gratitude for, is for his memories with his family. We're thankful for the memories. Please help them live a life to their fullest. That kind of thing that he prays for every time. Every time we sit down to eat. Thank you for the memories we have of our family. And
I'm glad you brought that up. Luke is in a really he's in a special situation because he's your youngest, right?
Yes.
And he's your youngest, so he's watching his older siblings have families. So he's seeing babies born. But again, he lives with his grandmother who's 89. That he's lived with her most of his life.
Yeah.
Right? And so he's being able to see that there are phases of life. That's quite a gift that I don't know how somebody accesses that otherwise, except for maybe being in a community, being in a church where there are people of all ages.
I don't know. I think he's also an especially tender kind of kid, where he has big feels and doesn't always know what to do with them or about them. But he is more aware of feelings than I think most 13-year-old boys are.
How do you see that? Play out in everyday ways?
Well, I think he had this little girl that he liked, and he was talking to her. I was like, okay, you have 30 minutes. You can FaceTime. You have to be in the room on FaceTime. You have 30 minutes. And they were talking, and she said, oh, hey, do you want to meet my other friend? Because I guess he had called. And so this other boy came on, and by the time the call was over, the other boy wasn't very nice. I could hear him, and I was like, just breathe. Leave Mama Bear at home. Just breathe. And by the time the call was over, I could tell that Luke was just hurt.
Crushed.
Like it had hurt his feelings. He liked this girl and he thought she liked him back. And I could tell that his feelings were hurt, and poor little guy, just cried for a little bit and needed a big hug. And, but it also opened it up for an opportunity to have a conversation about those kind of feelings. And maybe you're not
Mhm.
ready for those kinds of feelings. And so maybe we should just leave girls alone for a while. That kind of
That's right.
But and he was actually able to have that conversation with the little girl and be like, I'm not ready to be a boyfriend. I want to be your
Yeah,
friend. But
yeah,
but he feels things very deeply, and he's very sensitive to the change in the atmosphere when someone's unhappy,
right.
and he feels that, and he you know
It's not, I mean, and what a great thing for him to be exposed to so much of real life. And that's probably why he's able to recognize these what these big feelings are,
yeah,
because his life is so much more than just what he's interested in and what he wants to do and what his schedule is. This is a really kind of an important idea, really, that because he has been able to be involved in things that really, really matter at such a young age,
yeah.
that what an impact this will have on him as he continues to grow. Do you see him being any more particularly compassionate because of his experiences?
um
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. And he
I
doesn't
mean, he's
get
a
that.
normal kid.
He's a normal 13-year-old boy. And he sometimes forgets that there are other people around.
But when he
Right.
does, he's very good.
Yeah.
It was something. So when I was first when I met Steve and was introduced into his family, Kristen had just turned 9 and Andrew was 5.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think he was still 5, maybe he was 6. But something I had noticed developmentally that was different in Kristen and Andrew than from Ben and Hannah, the two that Steve and I had together during those early years. I saw this this pattern of empathy that they seem to naturally have, and I felt like it must have been because they had been through so much as children, having lost their mom, and she was, and she was sick before that. So they'd had just a different experience than somebody whose life is quite childlike without some of the heavy experiences that, come with death, disease, those kind of things. But then when Steve became really sick, in about 2006, when it was interesting because Ben and Hannah at that time were about the same age as Kristen and Andrew when Steve and I got married. So Kristen and Andrew they were 6 and 9, and then at about 6 and 9, uh, Steve got sick, and I saw Ben and Hannah's change. I saw them change. I saw this compassion come into them. This just you know maybe a little bit of a loss of childhood innocence, but still I feel like these experiences have softened them at a younger age than maybe they would have had, and that's been an interesting thing to observe. Have you seen anything like that yourselves?
Oh, I'm not sure that I was that aware of it. Um, but the scripture that keeps coming to mind is all of these things will be for your benefit. You know,
Yeah, all these
they're
things shall be for thy
For your
good.
for my
good.
good. Yeah, like yeah. I can't even remember the reference at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, when it's miserable and you're suffering and you're hurting and people around you are hurting, and you know all of these things will be for thy good. That it's so I imagine that anytime we go through something difficult, it changes us and the next time it happens again, it changes us a little bit more. And the next time it changes us more and helps us to become what the Lord needs us to become,
Yeah.
not what we think we are or what we think we need to be, but it helps us become what he needs us to be. And that's our purpose, is to become like him, and to learn so that we can be better and be more like him. And he's helping us along the way. Here's this hard thing, but I'm right here.
Yeah.
Right here. You can step out on the balance beam. I'm right here. I'm going to let go of
Yeah.
your hand now, but I'm right here.
Yeah. I totally agree. Because the alternative to that perspective and attitude is bitterness,
Yeah.
right? Bitterness or brokenness. A-
Well,
a-
one
a-
thing I'd like to add is that sometimes the help along the way is comes from areas you least expect. And this experience has been with me when I started reading through the items that you would eventually want to talk about. Uh, Leroy passed away, and I had to empty out my house and do it quickly because the people we were renting the house where we lived,
oh,
and they wanted the house because they had it up for sale. And so I was quickly trying to get everything cleared out, packed up, and uh, the lock on the front door wasn't working properly. And so I called the manager, and they said, "Oh, we'll have a locksmith come out and take care of it." And so the locksmith came, and his name was Mike. And he worked on changed the mechanism and everything. It was fine. It was good to go. And he was getting ready to leave, and he just left. "Well, your lock is fine now. Everything is okay." And "God bless you." And I said, "Oh,
oh,
thank you." And he said, "Why is that?" And I said, "I really needed that." And he said, and he came back in. He set his tools down and came back in. And he told me that, he said, "I'm a minister of such and such." I didn't really pick up. I just caught that
you heard,
he
yeah.
was a minister. Uh, and uh, he said, "Well, tell me why you needed the blessing." And then I told him that Leroy had passed away, and I was attempting to get the house cleaned up, and he could see that most of the furniture was gone, and you know, but he said, when he explained he was the minister, he said, "Could I give you a blessing?"
Oh,
I said, "Yes, of course." So he he said he asked permission to put his hand on my shoulder, and I said, "Yes, that's fine." And so he offered a beautiful prayer, just as though
mm.
I'd been anointed with oil and had a priesthood blessing, a beautiful blessing of comfort. Probably the most I felt since he passed away.
That is so beautiful.
And then he closed in the name of Jesus. So those blessings will come when you least expect them.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that this man, who in his capacity as a locksmith had come to your house for him just a day at work, but because of his relationship with Christ, he was able to see a need and stand in the place of the Savior for you at that moment. That's an incredible gift. That it makes me think of the verse in Mosiah in the Book of Mormon that says that these people who had committed to Christ would stand as a witness at all times and in all things and in all places.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is exactly what he had done. And that's a good reminder for all of us as we go through our normal day. You never know the pains that are in someone's heart, but God knows them. And and I think when we try to stay in a state of awareness for others, he'll open our eyes and let us be a part of bringing a blessing to someone's life,
Yeah.
like this man did for you. That's that's really wonderful. I know that just wanted to speak for a minute about this idea of what a blessing you all were to me when I met Steve, because I had never been married. I was 26 years old. I met this wonderful man who'd been through something really hard. He had the most darling kids. We were going to get married. and and honestly, I think, LaDeane, you were probably our first and biggest cheerleader. And you know, are the mother of his wife that passed away and the grandmother of his children. What made you decide to embrace me?
Simple, Julie. It's what I felt. And I've had to always trust the feeling. My mother taught me that. We'd ask permission to do something, and if she didn't want me to do it, she'd say, "No, I just have this feeling." And we heard her say that often. So we didn't do what she had a feeling about, and we were okay. Things were worked out best.
Yeah,
So I
you
just
just
had a feeling, and I followed through on my feelings.
it made a huge
Well, not
difference
only
for
that,
me.
both of my sons looked at you and said, "Oh my gosh, he looks like Alicia."
I know, I
That
know.
may not be a compliment to you,
Yeah. Well, Steve definitely had a type.
I was gonna say Steve's got a type.
Erin, what impact did that have on you, to see your parents be so welcoming?
I well, I never felt like it wasn't right. Like I never, there was never any like, well, that's not my sister, and like I never had any of those feelings that you might think somebody would have. Um, I it was, we wanted Steve to be happy. We wanted the kids to be happy. We wanted them to have a mother, and you came along and you were a perfect fit. And so it was never like there was never anything that felt off about it or that triggered any kind of animosity in any way. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It totally does. It totally does. And I think that it has so much to do with the success of the extended relationship that we've had. You know, I so from my perspective, I had lost both of my grandmothers before I was 4 or 5 years old, and and for the most part, men just aren't really good at, you know, extended family relationships. And my grandfathers were no different. I'm sure they loved me, but as far as I knew, I had grandparents kind of somewhere, but they weren't real close. And I really, really craved that kind of relationship my whole life. So coming into an experience where I saw children with grandparents, living grandparents, it was really, really important to me that they maintain a relationship with their
Mhm.
grandparents, something I hadn't had. And it was super important to me that that your family always kept that connection that you had had. There was, to me, it seemed like there was no good reason for Steve and I to go off and make this new family and, leave the family he'd already been a part of. That just seemed, and it seemed against everything I believed in, right? That would be wrong. Not just that it would be a bad idea, but that it would actually be wrong. But I think it's worked because we both, on both sides, have loved and respected each other.
Yeah.
It's been a tremendous blessing. I mean, LaDeane, you talked about being serious about being a mother and that role. I mean, you came up when both of my babies were born and were just as amazing and helpful and wonderful as my own mom. And Steve's mom came up to help. I mean, you've always been a wonderful mother-in-law and grandmother, and just been so grateful. And Erin and I had babies at the same time. That was really fun.
Yeah, we had
The girls.
the girls are all, how many? There were what, 5
They're just like,
granddaughters but born that year?
yeah.
Yeah, we have a picture of all
Yeah, all
five.
those baby girls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Rhonda's daughter, and then
Yeah, Heather.
Jeff's 2 girls. Yeah.
Heather,
Yeah.
Lila, Molly, and Catherine, and then Emma was the year after.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything that you have today. I really appreciate it. Both of you ladies have been through a lot, and yet your openness to others and your openness to uh, change in general, your testimonies of Christ, your desire to do what's right are still just so solid. You're such good examples of people who have continued to be faithful and nurturing in spite of painful experiences. So I'm very grateful for that. And before we finished, I just want to ask you what I ask everyone, which is, what do you think it means to grieve well?
Well, Rhonda is an example of that for me. When I see that little girl laugh about everything, I know she's up there waiting to see me again someday. But just having that photograph of it to be reminded of what she was really like, that was such good. That was grieving well, I think.
Yeah.
Because I'm not grieving for Rhonda anymore. She's gone and I miss her. I have a question about cooking, especially, or just a question about anything, and I would always call her and get the answer. So that's my idea of grieving well.
Well, and I think that that it's okay to let the tears come, and it's okay to be sad, but you can't let that take over. You have to keep doing and being and living and not just existing but living. You have to keep living your life, because the people you love don't want you to stop what you're doing. They don't want you to stop your growth and progression, and they want you to keep going so that you can be together again. But that it is okay to take time to cry, and it's okay to be sad because you miss them, because you love them. But don't stop living because of it. Don't let it overtake you. Don't let the sadness overrun your life.
Yeah.
And
Thank
I have
you.
one comment about that. I
Yes.
have this philosophy that every time the tears come, it's the Holy Ghost telling you that this is important
I love that.
and to pay attention. So, in my view, the tears that come are not bad or wrong. The Holy Ghost is speaking to you. This is important. Take notice.
I love that. Thank you so much. Words of wisdom. I love you both. Thanks for
Thank you.
thanks for taking time with me today.